Okay, can everybody see each other as well as see the PowerPoint? Right. I know that's highly redundant. That's probably as much for my own good to make sure I'm doing it as anything else. So forgive me on that. So mic check. Everybody got your mics open? All right. So the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Lift up your hearts.
We lift them to the Lord.
Let us give thanks to the Lord our God.
It is
right to give God thanks and praise.
It is right, a joyous thing, particularly at the end of a busy day, I'm sure, for many of you. I do recognize that doing evening classes are at times difficult, particularly 3-hour classes. And so I do appreciate you giving time. I know this actually works. What we're discovering, this works better though for people who have commitments during the day to offer late afternoon and evening classes. So this is probably part of the rhythm and routine of who we are at NTS going forward for a while now. Okay. Just general discussion on Nowin's chapter on discernment. This week was basically reading the book of nature. So we're still kind of in this part 2, discerning guidance from different sources. And this week it was the book of nature. So any observations from your journal? Anything that kind of jumped out at you from that standpoint?
Growing up in Romania, where I grew up is in the heart of Romania, Transylvania. And the city is just beautiful. It's surrounded by nature and by hills. So I always grew up walking and being a part of the nature, and was always a part of a worship to the Lord. But unfortunately, since I'm in the States, there's not a lot of walking going on. There's a lot of driving. So I haven't appreciated the nature as much as I wish, but I could resonate with Henry Nouwen this week about just God creating the world and creating us. And I'll let other people say other stuff, but that's what it was for me.
And only because of the popular notions around Transylvania, it's as opposed to the really understanding the real beauty of that part of the world is a pretty interesting thing. So I'll let you put up with all the side questions later in the small group breakout from that standpoint. But thank you, Paul. Other observations?
I thought the timing of when we read this was pretty timely, because that's like a big reason of why I went to Utah last week, which I think maybe only my small group knew that I was like in Utah to just kind of pray through some things. And I'm in a transitional season. And so like I went to the mountains to hear God more clearly. And then I came back to Oklahoma City and we read this chapter. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Because yeah, I do that a lot. Like if there's different things that I have to pray through or think through, I usually try to change my location so that it shifts my perspective a little bit.
Yeah.
So I liked the context of what we were learning this week.
Okay.
And to see it in like a broader view.
Okay. Do other people have sort of favorite places to go to get away from life in the city, to kind of get out into nature in one form or fashion?
Anywhere with a beach.
To the beach?
Where I can kayak or walk on the sand. Those are my favorite things.
Okay. A particular beach, Holly, or?
Well, no. There's one in Michigan that my family goes to on Lake Michigan every year. And so I guess that's probably the first one that comes to mind. But then last summer, I spent quite a bit of time on a lake in New York and found that to be equally refreshing. So it doesn't really matter where the beach is.
Okay. Melody,
Yeah, I live on land that abuts a state park, big state park. So I do a lot of walking with my dog up on the trails in the state park several times a week. And it is my favorite place to pray because I talk out loud when I pray. It keeps my brain from wandering to all the things I need to do. So my dog hears my prayers, and so that's my favorite place, just because it's so accessible and it works.
that's great. That's great.
And the other thing I would say is that sometimes when I'm driving to work, because I have a very long commute to come up to New Hampshire, it's dark and then the sun starts to come up and you'll see all kinds of animals along the way, along the road, because there hasn't been that much going on just yet. And I always just find that to be, those are spiritual moments for me, you know, when I see them and I remember, yeah, God created all this stuff, that these animals and these things around me that I don't get to see all the time. And here they are, just to remind me that God's big and he's done a lot of really cool things. So I like that too.
That's great. Others, Dawn?
Well, I have a confession, and I had the same confession when we took spiritual formation during the course of study. I am a city girl.
Okay.
I would rather be downtown at any time of night with people around or those types of noises. When I'm outside, like the woods, I'm not a camper. The idea of being out in the woods, I lived in the Poconos for a small time in the 90s, and it was terrifying to me. I will give Henry Nouwen his due, but I have to say, where I am most, a city park, you know, the white noise of the city, the sounds of traffic, and that to me is where I feel connected, just like the heartbeat, like literally the heartbeat of what's happening in the community right there. So take me out to the woods. No, please no.
Okay.
Please
Yeah.
no.
Interesting enough, Carlo Corretto, who's has written a lot in spirituality and spiritual formation, and really more out of the Desert Fathers, those kinds of things. He wrote an interesting book called Finding the Desert in the City, as a way of connecting to both places of engagement, which would be more of this, but also displacement. In other words, finding those quiet spots that are not artificial, but truly are a part of what the city has to offer as well, which I've always found is one of the most interesting books, kind of taking the city seriously from that standpoint. Anybody else? I admit, I walk my dog, and we have we're in a suburban neighborhood. There are times, sometimes in the morning, a lot of times in the evening, where we get what I call a big Kansas sky, where you have multiple layers of hue, everything from oranges and reds and yellows that kind of fade into blues. And those are pretty remarkable mornings. So I'm not sure my dog Simba appreciates it that much. His nose is pretty much to the ground, but it really is just part of what I grew up. I grew up in North Carolina, close to the Appalachian Mountains. So did have, and North Carolina is an interesting state because we were within about a 3-hour drive of the beach or the mountains in any given moment. So kind of grew up with both those as part of my rhythm from that standpoint. Last question, just reflect, why would Nouwen start with this topic of walk with Jesus on the earth as a place to begin? I mean, he talks about other ways of appreciating nature, even says God's first language is nature. So he gets to the point, and even to a call to renew creation. But why begin, do you think, why do you think he begins with this idea of walking with Jesus on the earth?
One of the quotes that I like the most in this section says, God is not far from us that we should have to descend to the depths of the sea or ascend to the clouds to find him. God's presence is in the things that are closest to us, things that we touch and feel, things that we move and live with day to day. While it is true that God is a hidden presence, we have only to let nature speak to us about God who is everywhere. And I just feel like that, yeah, it's so much about cultivating awareness more than it is about like conjuring up some like mountaintop experience. And I think nature gives us space to be aware of God's presence.
Yeah, yeah. It is interesting to contemplate the earthiness of Jesus, I guess is one way to think about that. And so it's and I hope, I mean, the one thing I do like about now is at times it is about those magnificent settings, but it's also about even the ordinary and common and everyday ways in which we connect that I think is really important. Okay. Last thoughts, everybody. Okay.
I did have one quick question surrounding the blog post or something. I believe you said that there was an assignment at some point of taking some of our devotional thoughts and making something more formal. Is that correct?
That's correct. And but let me remind you, that can be something you've been writing weekly in a Word document, or it can be just literally a journal that you've been keeping. So I hope you hear that. And then all you do is put a date, chapter title at the most, and a reflection. So I've not been highly specific. I've had students submit that, and all they do is pull out their camera and do 5 or 6 pictures of the journal entries and send those in. I'm not really, it's just more an opportunity. If you've been writing notes in the corners of the book, which has happened a couple of times, and people get kind of panicked, don't panic. Send me a couple of the pictures of those notes. So it's just giving you permission to choose to do what you want from that to kind of capture your thoughts and engaging this book. Does that make sense?
Would those be just to you?
Yes, I
Good.
promise. Just me and Facebook. That's no, I'm just
No.
kidding. No, those are, I take those as
Compliment.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
My standard line, unless in those journaling exercises, you indicate that you might be a danger to someone else or yourself, and then I have a duty to report. But if you do that in engaging now, and I'm really worried about you from that standpoint anyway. So that's facetious. I hope you guys hear that. But seriously, I do. That's one reason why you can choose to curate your thoughts and interacting with the book is as you choose. And some of you may already have a journaling exercise that you do even daily. This is just an invitation to do it maybe once during the week as a part of that. Okay.
When is that due date?
I'll ask for it during the break. I'll just ask for an update. And at that point, just to kind of see how you're capturing things. I'm not voting you on or off the island. And then you submit it finally at the end of the semester. And it's merely, this word has all the wrong connotations to it, but it's really just, did you do it? It's almost a compliance component. Those of you who remember, yes, I have read 80% or 100% of the reading kinds of things. I'm really just wanting to see that, yes, you did interact with them. And at that point, okay. All right, all hearts clear? Well, we'll do prayer requests. Who would pray for us this evening? Okay, Holly. Let's just take a couple moments for requests. Any updates or new needs to share?
So I'll
I
give,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry, Morgan, go ahead. Okay. I'll give an update on my mom and then add a prayer request. So my mom has not had any major issues this week, which is good. She is very, very weak. So if you continue to pray for her, she's frustrated by how weak she is. So, and it's understandable since she's got COVID. But she hasn't had any major, lung issues or anything from that. So, and her cardiac status seems to be fairly, okay. So keep praying for her if you don't mind. And then I was on call this weekend and delivered a baby who was really still very much struggling for her life. She's took us about 3 hours to resuscitate her and get her to an ICU. And she's just really, really sick. So we're hoping that she pulls through and has all her faculties. And if you can pray for baby Natalie,
Natalie?
very
Okay.
much on my heart. Yeah.
Premature birth, Melody, or?
No, just probably some sort of cardiac defect.
Okay,
And they're still trying to figure out what it is because it's not structural. It's more about the rhythm of the heart, and heart just doesn't cope with any kind of stress. Her heart rate just drops. So the NICU doesn't actually know what they're dealing with, but they are seeing some improvement in some of the numbers today. So we're hoping for the best.
okay. For Natalie, yes, thank you. Any others? Well, yes, tell me. Can't hear you, Delmy. Can you
Can you
unlock?
hear me?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
We lost you. I don't know.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, they have to hold something down.
I actually I have 4 microphones on. I don't know which one is working. Oh my gosh. So I work in the cervical cancer space right now, and it really hits home because I have a very good friend who is actually just got diagnosed with cervical cancer. So it's really close to home. And the fact that I'm on the preventive side of things, how a vaccine can actually help prevent that. It's just really, it's tough. And she just got she doesn't have much time. And I have a very good friend who's actually a pediatrician who wasn't feeling well. This is another friend of mine, and wonderful human being. She's been in the business of kids probably for about 27 years, and she wasn't feeling well. And she just got diagnosed with cancer. It's literally all over her body. Never smoked, and she's still practicing. And she's going to continue to practice, and probably they're giving her 3 to 4 months to live.
Wow.
So really, yeah, that's a hard one too. So we can keep, it's Maritza and Eucharis.
Okay. Marissa and Eucharis.
Yep.
That sounds like Eucharist, as in
It is.
give thanks. So, yes.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
literally, she's from Colombia, and that's why her mom named her. And her mom just died. So
Oh, dear.
it's been tough. Yeah. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I mentioned Sylvia and Vlad last week. They are missionaries in Ukraine. I've got to learn not to use the Ukraine. So they are missionaries in Ukraine. And just continued prayer for the country and the uncertainty of that situation. I know it's been at least some possibilities of peace, but it's still an uncertain situation. So just for them and their congregation, which is in Kyiv, if I remember correctly. Okay, anything else? All right, Holly, would you lead us in prayer?
Dear God, I just thank you that we can come to you at all times with all things. I just want to ask for Melody's mom who has COVID. She's frustrated because she's feeling weak, and we're thankful, Lord, that she has no major issues, but I just pray that if it be your will, that you just give her some strength and help her as she continues to recover, that she'll recover a little bit more quickly than she has been. And Lord, I pray for baby Natalie, who's in the NICU right now, Lord. It seems that she's has some sort of heart problem, heart distress. Her rhythm's off, Lord. I just pray that you will give the nurses and the doctors who are attending the NICU just supernatural wisdom to be able to deal with that situation. And Lord, I pray for Dalmi's good friends, her friend Maritza, who was diagnosed with cervical cancer. Lord, I pray that you would just help her as she's dealing with that, and be with Dalmi as she ministers to her, that she will know the words to say to comfort her, and to be able to just be a really good friend. And also to her friend Eucharis. Lord, she's only got 3 to 4 months to live. I just pray, Lord, that you'll help her to focus on what's important. And I also pray for Dalmi as she ministers to her, that she'll be able to know how to comfort and help her as well. And dear Lord, I pray for Sylvia and Vlad, who are in Ukraine, in Kyiv. Lord, I just pray that you'll be with their congregation, that you will give them a peace in the midst of all of the stress that's going on and the uncertainty of the situation, that they will be able to see that you are with them and sense your presence. I gotta just pray that you be with this class tonight, that we will learn all it is that you want us to learn. And I just thank you for the opportunity to study with all of these folks here tonight, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Holly. I do appreciate that. And like I said, we'll just continue. So it is kind of like a prayer circle. Eventually, everybody gets invited into this prayer exercise, if you will, from that standpoint. Okay. Well, we're to kind of get us moving tonight. Basically, this is the week of the business model canvas, and in just a minute, I'll move you over into that group. For some reason, and I don't know why, my resources on my computer are trying to riot this evening. I started having problems during the first class, and I've tried to fix it a couple of times, and I'm just hoping we can get through. Kind of just curious, did anybody have problems with the actual business model canvas itself? Did you have problems filling in the boxes, or were you able to locate that material? Anybody?
I worked on mine last week and I think everything's saved, but I would be in the middle of typing and my whole thing would like go blank and then like restart me at the top of the form, and I'd have to like scroll back down. So I don't know if that's normal. I don't know. It looked like everything saved, but it took me like probably 5 times longer than it needed to do.
Okay. And now this is when you're not in charge of the professional side of this stuff. Drives me slightly insane. So I'll just name that as well. You can always find out. Let me see if I've got it pulled up. If you go into the workspace, then you should be able to see whether or not everything's being saved at that location. Okay. So Deanna, I don't know if you did that, but it's just basically under, let's see if this will load in a hurry. Yes. So if you're in the workspace and it has all the tools that are there, and you see business model canvas and you click on it, you should be seeing it populate. And then if need be, if you're ever nervous about this, under the preview mode, at this point, you can actually download it or move into an edit mode and then start editing right there on the spot. Okay. So the only reason I bring this up, just so that we're all kind of comfortable from that standpoint. All right. And Delmy had sent me a note, so bear with me just a second. One thing I wanted to show you, let me kind of, if move a couple things around here briefly for just a second. Alrighty then. This is normally where I'm in trouble when I start sharing more than one screen. So I'm going to do this with fear and trembling. So if I think you guys can see if I got the right one. Okay, I'm trusting you guys can see the Excel file. Is that correct? Now, you don't see any names for a reason, and these are not stacked alphabetically. So if you panic, don't. They're kind of jumbled up for a reason. But what I am seeing, just so you know, what I see of your activity in Fast Track, remember I talked about this, is yes, I can go under any area like position, market research, purpose, service, workspace tool, and all I get's a little bitty X for those who've actually done that or not from that standpoint and saved it. And then what I can also do is get a summary. And so, for instance, good news is pretty much everybody did 100% of the Ideate section on the entrepreneurial lifestyle. Then it varied a little bit more from idea to business concept for percentages. Then under market research, it's varied even more. And I'm not surprised by that. And then the business model design, well, at least when I took this, which was earlier today, so you may have worked on it this afternoon, it tells me who's been working on that or who's not. Does that make sense? And if you look over here and some of you going, well, there's legal strategy and business exits. And yes, somebody has been an eager beaver. So what they did was, remember I gave you permission not to work on the business model design, but actually look at pricing and legal strategy and exits. And somebody took me up on that and they put most of their work in that area. Does that make sense? Or if you notice, no one else has put that much time into those, and that is okay. So all I'm doing is just getting a general feel of each student as time goes along. I will look at this mid-semester and just sort of factor it in as a part of class participation. Does that mean you have to have 100% in everything? No. But if you're curious where you stand, if you're nervous about it, send me an email and I can pick out just your line, no one else's, and send you both the little X's and the percentiles so far, so you have a sense of that from that standpoint. But I don't want you to overstress over this. This is just my way of being able just to kind of keep track of where people are, where they might be struggling. Normally, I don't worry until suddenly, like the whole commit section disappears on somebody. Then I know now's the time where somebody's really wrestling just to get things done. Does that make sense? And yes, I look at it mid-semester. So if you need to catch up at some point, I get that. I have been a graduate student in my life. And so I do recognize that. Does that mean you go in and do all the exercises? Again, no. But I keep telling you, remember I talked about this thing called Greek and Hebrew, that it's a lot easier to work on these things as you go along rather than try to do it as a big lump sum. This is why. I think you're beginning to see how many exercises that if you put it off, you may be in for a very long weekend at some point by mid-semester, okay? All right. That's just only just in case you're concerned, just to kind of let you know how I keep tabs, but I'm not seeing the content. That's why actually it's more your posts on the Moodle forum that help me kind of know what's working, what's not. We'll back to, see if this goes one more time. Back to the PowerPoint. Before we break into groups, I was kind of curious if you hear me. Can you guys hear me? Did I break up? All right. All right, can you hear me now? And you can see. So I am curious, were you surprised by the design wrinkle in this week's component of what you were working on? Which, yes, no? Not really? Okay. One of the things you'll find is that the entrepreneurship process on occasion, and this actually will come up more than once, where they really want you to test out or try out an idea, kind of begin to work on it through design thinking, because it is really, entrepreneurship is a kind of adaptive, iterative process. And the more you do that, the better the quality of the venture as you work on it, and then come back and rework on some of the ideas. And so, just remember, it is a part, design thinking is a part of entrepreneurship thinking. And you can use it several places, though it isn't everything that's going on in entrepreneurship thinking, but entrepreneurs are more and more beginning to incorporate design thinking at key sections of their own development of their ventures, to say the least. All right. Well, I'll put you in your groups. So I'm going to assign you there to kind of talk through, hopefully, your Canvas. So I'm kind of trusting you've at least begun to do the work on key partners, key activities, value propositions, customers relations, target markets, assets, distribution channels, cost structure, and revenues. And only the last thing is a prep. Yeah, so I'm still on making good time. And one more time, just to see how far my resources on my computer go before it starts throwing things at me. Wanted to show a video that you'll have access to of where this whole business model canvas, how that comes into being. And if for no other reason, to kind of give you a kind of conceptual schema. This was actually created by Strategizer, which is one of the major companies that designs apps for a number of different kinds of business planning. And so let me just show this video briefly, and then you're into your groups, okay?
An organization's business model can be described with 9 basic building blocks: your customer segments, your value proposition for each segment, the channels to reach customers, customer relationships you establish, the revenue streams you generate, the key resources and key activities you require to create value, the key partners, and the cost structure of the business model. But it's not sufficient to just enumerate the 9 building blocks. What you really want to do is to map them out on a pre-structured canvas. This is what we call the business model canvas, a tool that helps you map, discuss, design, and invent new business models. Let's briefly go through the 9 building blocks, starting with the customer segments. These are all the people or organizations for which you're creating value. This includes simple users and paying customers. For each segment, you have a specific value proposition. These are the bundles of products and services that create value for your customers. The channels describe through which touchpoints you're interacting with customers and delivering value. Customer relationships outline the type of relationship you're establishing with your customers. Revenue streams make clear how and through which pricing mechanisms your business model is capturing value. Then you need to describe the infrastructure to create, deliver, and capture value. The key resources show which assets are indispensable in your business model. The key activities show which things you really need to be able to perform well. The key partners show who can help you leverage your business model, since you won't own all key resources yourself, nor you perform all key activities. Then once you understand your business model's infrastructure, you'll also have an idea of its cost structure. So with the business model canvas, you can map out your entire business model in one image. This works for startup entrepreneurs just as well as for the most senior executives.
Okay, let me get out of here. Hang on a second. I hope. There we go. All right, well, that just gives you an orientation. So let me
Hi
turn.
there, welcome to Strategizer.
Uh,
I'm assuming you have a working understanding of the business model and value proposition
Hang on a
Canvas is.
second. I
But
thought
if
I
not,
closed
don't
that.
worry, we've got you covered. The Strategizer Academy will get you up to speed quickly with lots of great videos about the tools and concepts you'll be using in Strategizer.
No, thank you. There we go. I always have to have at least one awkward moment, right? I mean, it's just natural from that standpoint. Well, I'm going to send you into your groups mainly to discuss how far you got in the business model canvas, and then we'll come back and talk about it in general. Holly, question?
Yes, when I went to the workspace on my screen, it shows me 9 out of 9 on the canvas, like it's completed. But then it shows like business pitch or something like that, and it says 7 out of 30. Is that something that we continue to work on, or is that something that should be showing up as completed?
Yeah,
Because
yeah. Let me double check that while you guys are talking to each other. The pitch
okay,
normally,
'cause- yeah,
the pitch should have been done as a part of Ideate, but they may have you come back and they do this. There's an iterative process here where they may have other elements of the pitch that show up, particularly around marketing, which will come up with commit section and even the refine section, so that they may have different activities where you're continuing to work on your pitch. But basically, I believe the pitch is pretty well done once you're out of Ideate. That's sort of one of the big pieces there. So let me double check.
so then that may mean that some of my work just didn't save.
It could be, and it may even be there, but the little save button, once it clicked, and it didn't hold it from that standpoint. Okay. All right. Here we go. Opening up your rooms. And Dummy, I have both. So you can, I pulled both of yours into the same space. So you can click on both of them and move over. Did it move you over? That's okay. Hang on. They've got your voice in there, but so I don't know if you're hearing their audio and seeing me. So hang on a second. Nope, I don't want to do that. No, I can't forcibly move you into that section. So that's the thing that's driving me nuts. I was hoping I could do that. Tell me, do you have sound on one and video on the other? Let's see. Well, let me do share. See if I can get myself in position here and share screen again. So anything come up in your small groups? Any concerns, I guess is one way to say it, or considerations? You guys can see the PowerPoint slide again, correct? Anything that just process-wise, going through the, basically the business model canvas? No? A lot of, yeah, Delmy?
Yeah, we talked about, partnerships, which are so critical, and in which partners, and then after that, this more start to pop up within that realm. You have one here, but then you start looking at others that you just might not necessarily think about at the beginning, but they're there. And some are very expensive partners. So it's a reality check.
Yeah, and one thing to point out in what you just said is that a lot of times, and particularly, I think it was one group, it's like, well, I have a sentence here. I have 3/4 of a sentence here. I have maybe a sentence and a half here. That's okay for now. Part of what the business model canvas is, are you starting to think about these categories? Can you begin to add components into it? Yeah, there's not a whole lot you can put in those boxes to begin with, though they can stretch. But the main reason I want you to start working with this, I'll go ahead and say it, is if you are not going to put together a business plan at the end of the semester, if you're not going to ride the venture all the way down the rabbit hole to the business plan, I will go ahead and ask that you actually have a fairly robust business model canvas as your submission for this part of the class. Does that make sense? So it's not as big, it's not as in-depth, but that at least you continue to work on this component as you go along. And the good news about this component is that it sets in the workspace. So even as you're working on some of the other marketing and some of those kinds of things, you can continue to come back to this and tweak it, refine it, build out the narratives underneath each one of those sections. And by the time the semester is over with, even if you're not going to put together a full bore business plan to submit as your major project, you can at least have a fairly robust business model canvas that gives you the kind of sense of the capacity of what your venture might be able to accomplish. Yes, Rachel?
So like the major project there at the end, I've looked on the syllabus and everything. It doesn't have a lot of explanation. So this, what we're filling out sort of, will be a part of the final project.
No, this will be the final thing that you submit as class participation for this aspect of the course. And if you want to do the full project, then you basically go in and submit the business proposal. I want to be careful if I get the language right, but it's that you have the business plan, which is another element that's further down the line that you would literally submit to someone if you were trying to get their support and endorsement of what you're trying to accomplish. Joel?
So if we chose option 2 this week, we still need to go in and do this canvas.
Right. So if you're going to do,
right. I misunderstood that.
Yeah. Wait 1 second. So you're fine. So just so you know that, because this is something you can come back to over the rest as the semester unfolds. But if you're going to go, truthfully, if you're going to do the business plan, some of the things around pricing and exit, not so much the exits, but the pricing pieces are things that you might want to think through before it's all said and done. Okay. So there's kind of major project is basically the business plan, minor project, but it summarizes your work on for this part of the semester of the course, is this business canvas. And you're just starting that now. And trust me, you'll be able to continue to kind of fill that in as you go from that standpoint. Okay. All right. And other questions? I thought we would get to Odyssey planning this week, but it's actually next week. This is one time where I'd moved a piece of the course around. So my apologies on that. But when we get to the Odyssey plan, we'll also talk about big project, small project kind of thing, just what you need to turn in just to mark your progress in the course on the design thinking versus turning in a full bore Odyssey plan from that standpoint. Okay. All right. So I want you to continue to work with both of these, but now you're beginning to see where the templates are that really kind of guide the final concerns. Any questions, any concerns? Prayer requests, imprecatory psalms toward the professor?
Can I make one more clarification? Or
Sure.
ask for one more? If I decide that there's no way that I ever want to start a business and I want to do the Odyssey plan, I still need to continue to work through Fast Track. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're going to stay with it. So I want you to work the system. And let me just put it this way. You may never start a business, but I do want you to have the familiarity of this. And frankly, the rest of the elements as we move into commit, hear that language. Are you ready to commit? And even refining your venture before launching is all of those are just elements that go into entrepreneurship thinking. And so I want you to continue to work with it with this kind of general idea. So no, you would not kick it to the curb, so to speak, but you're continuing to work with it. And this is a way in which hopefully you're beginning to understand how entrepreneurs think and the kind of methodological considerations that they have to do to go forward from that standpoint. Okay. Anybody else? No, well, one way to think about it, and I do have a slide on this, just to kind of take a moment to consider where we are. I mean, we're only through 2 of the 5 segments in Kauffman Fast Track Education. So one way to think about it, the ideate and position. And so one way to think about ideate, that first segment that you went through is what starts with, do you have an idea? Now, I'll just name this. Normally, people entering into entrepreneurship education come with some idea of what they want to do. In other words, they're highly motivated. A lot of times, they actually have to pitch the idea to even be invited into classes in certain places. Why? Because there is potential startup money available at the end of the class. And so they want highly motivated people because then they pay very close attention to every one of these elements. But I have sit in on those classes, and that's not everyone. There are some people who just, through employment, relocation strategies, or maybe they were downsized out of a company and they're not sure they want to go to work for another business, and they wonder if an entrepreneurship lifestyle might be good for them. They also come in exploring. But I'll be upfront, every time I've been involved in these kind of classes, they want you to start with an idea. This is not an abstract introduction to entrepreneurship. This is a learn by doing approach from that standpoint. Does that make sense? And usually it's connected to an experience that you already have. Just a reminder, it's an itch that something that's just bugged you, maybe in your own profession and field, or it's a need that you see that really speaks to a context and you want to do it. Just again, a reminder, very few serial entrepreneurs in the world. Most people come bringing some of their experience. For us, it's rather interesting because it can be either experiences in professional fields or in ministry. So there could be a large array of places where people get interested in this conversation. And as I've alluded to in the past, many times it's a way for some people in our who actually see the venture as the ministry. So it's not merely a venture to help them earn money in order to go do ministry, but the venture itself is seen as part of their ministry. And that to me is really a kind of key component. Then in Ideate, it just asks, does this match your personal vision? And can you communicate the gist of the idea, the big idea? This was that business concept statement, which was a pretty packed set of 5 questions that you were supposed to, in some ways, do you have a kind of sense of the whole of the idea and a very tightly wound concept and framework that is to some degree fairly easy to remember. I know Dawn is probably really tired of hearing that word gist because she's in my practical theology class as well. But it is one way to understand what that business concept statement's about. And do you understand implicitly the intended value of what this venture for others? And that's the elevator speech. So what is the value of the venture in and of itself, but is it, well, how does it really fit within other people's lives? And how is it a value to them? And one way to think about what comes out, what you get coming out of the ideate section is a kind of core competency. I'm just going to use that language for now. That just asks the question, do you have an idea that is A, true to you, worth the risk, that's that business concept statement, and important for others? And one thing entrepreneurs ask about their venture is, is it an idea, a creative, imaginative idea, but still is it one that's true to who you are? That's why they start there. Is it worth taking a risk on? In other words, it seems to have the potential of doing something, and would it be something that's seen important in other people's lives? Does that make sense? Now, I could have written a book on entrepreneurship, wrote a chapter, put that at the end and given you 5 illustrations, and you go, and then flip to the next chapter. But instead, you've been working on this with your own venture in mind. Does that make sense? Well, the next piece, this position, it really, in some ways, what we've been working on the last 2 weeks is just, does this idea, this venture, does it fit your context? Is it a real problem or a need that the venture solves for others? There are people served, there are opportunities created. That's why you do market research. Is what difference will this make in your context? And are there obstacles in the context, including competition? I mean, just other people that sometimes are doing the same thing, so they're direct or indirectly, or even if you introduce this, could this create places where obstacles will come up through competitors? But it's asking you the contextual question. How does this venture, how does your idea fit? And in a way, that's a kind of external assessment around this idea so that you have a sense of where this fits within what the very community you're trying to serve, excuse me, or the constituency you're trying to serve. And then tonight was really asking a very simple question. Can you build an infrastructure to carry out your idea in that given context? And if you think about some of those questions in the Canvas, they really are times real world conversations, because you're trying to think who your partners are going to be, who your customers are. And hear this language that was actually in the video that we'll come back to. And what value will you provide? And then how is that? And the classic line is indexed. And index normally is through monetary pricing indexes, in other words, money. But there could be other kinds of indexes. There are social capital indexes. There are other ways to talk about how that value is communicated. It's just that in business, the universal language of exchange tends to be in monetary forms, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the only form that you're thinking about. And in a way, the core elements create this kind of interface between the venture's infrastructure, the kind of, in some ways going all the way back to the gist of the idea, and how that now begins to expand outward and fit within a given context. And the core competency is, what's the depth of discernment that you need to exercise to see that the idea really does fit the context that you have in mind and carry the sufficient infrastructure to meet the goals, the proposition value. And entrepreneurs are always thinking about this. This is one of the things why, if those of you who've had business people, I'm going to speak to pastors for a minute, on your church board, and they keep asking these nasty questions. They're thinking about launching new ministries and stuff, and they keep going, how will you make it happen? And why is that? Why do we need that in the church now? They keep asking these kind of on the ground questions because a lot of times they're thinking through those kind of core questions of context and infrastructure and how what you're proposing into the church really matters from that moment. Do you know how to position your venture in such a way that it can make a difference over time? Let me check in. Is this making sense to everybody? Okay, and I think I stopped recording and let me see. Nope, it's running. Good. Okay. We're going to shift gears, but I just wanted to kind of remind us where we are. We've got more to do. Next week, we'll talk about marketing. But I'll give a case in point if Joel, Don, and Chris, if you don't mind, because we had a little bit of a conversation. This is a classic one with 501c3s is kind of, and we're at this point, is who are in some ways, let me back this up one slide if I can. Sort of who are what is the customers in this particular model? Because 501c3s do ministry often to people who cannot afford the services that the 501c3 is offering. That's a compassionate ministry center, right? And often the kinds of resources the center is offering is specific to the focus of that center. So they can be immediate relief, so that this is time sensitive, immediate sort of disaster relief. They're moving into places that no longer possess within themselves the resources to even to provide basic needs, meet basic needs. And this is why organizations like A Heart to Heart and others come in, because there's nothing to build upon. It's hurricanes wiped it out. The earthquake has shattered all the infrastructures, and all the relief has to be external to provide for immediate need. Or there are 501c3s that come in and basically they're trying to rebuild areas. And so it is much more of a constant community relief, but it's over longer periods of time. It's not more immediate in its focus, but it's over longer period of times. Then there are 501c3 compassionate ministry centers that work more what I call community development. As a matter of fact, there's a major organization that spends all of its time working more at that level, saying, how do we come in and help build that infrastructure and not necessarily control it, but release that to the very people that need that and help them take ownership and build that and partner with them. And then there's community advocacy, which is sometimes recognizing that communities can't do that on their own, but they need larger systems of support. And we have to work as advocates for them in light of broader social frameworks, city, federal, those kinds of things. And we speak on their behalf because they maybe don't have the social capital to do that. Does that make sense? 4 different versions of compassionate ministry. And in some ways, each one of those have different donor bases that often want to see how your services to that community match their sense of mission and purpose to the donor base. And so in a way, those donors are the customers, not the clients in the field. Because what they need to see is the transparency of your ministry in that setting in such a way that they'll invest monies toward seeing that you're accomplishing your intended goals for the sake of others. Does that make sense? And so the whole thing about key activity, this whole idea about making your product or service valuable to a customer, there just to reframe the language is, how is it that you're making the services you're providing to people who can't afford it consistent with the very goals and mission of the donors? And how do they see the transparency of how that's being done in such a way that they continue to invest into what your ministry is doing? But it's the same kind of question. And then how do you deliver that to them becomes one of the kind of key considerations. That makes sense? And that's just an example. We often intuitively do this. I mean, if you're in the mission field, you send information back. Often to in Nazarene circles, you might send it. I think they still have links. So to different churches that are supporting you, you go out and work and witness, and you talk about the ministry that's going on to constituencies, hoping they'll continue to reinforce what you're doing on the mission field. We do these kinds of things trying to show the value of what we're accomplishing to the very people we're hoping will join us in the ministry. It's still the same sets of questions that are going on. And how do we make sure that happens? And this becomes more a kind of, almost one way to think of it is more of a business to business, because you're bringing in allies to join you in your ministry to others than it is. And sometimes it's actually foundations that are actually doing this, that you're actually inviting in from that standpoint. Okay. So that's just an example of how this concept map can work if you hold the categories a little bit loose. For those of you trying a for-profit, it's still the straight up questions. I mean, no matter how much you think an idea is going to work well, do you really know your customer base? And do you really know the best way to deliver? And do you know what the potential competition might be? These are just core questions every entrepreneur has to deal with. Again, not to mitigate risk, but to manage it going forward. And that becomes part of what you need to keep in mind as you're working on these ventures. Okay? Concerns? Okay, I hope that was sufficiently robust enough that at least right now you're not looking for your second cup of coffee. It's going to get worse, so I just wanted to check now, okay? All right. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about design thinking and where we are in the process. I'm just curious. I mean, one of the things that designers really basically spend a lot of time talking about is not so much building a map. I mean, in one way, the entrepreneurship education is a lot more about mapping. That's why they have a concept map. Designers really don't talk so much about maps as they talk about a compass. Why would that be important for designers? Why is it that instead of talking about creating a map, they really want to spend more time talking about, well, using and utilizing a compass? What comes to mind from your standpoint? Brandon?
Well, I think the map makes it seem like there's one destination that you're going towards, whereas a compass is perhaps more so for the purpose of pointing you in a good direction. So there, you could end up anywhere, but at the very least, you have some sort of direction that you're heading.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's a good answer. So I'm going. Other thoughts or ideas? That it doesn't mean Brandon got it wrong. So let me just name. Can you guess what I'm thinking? Moment. But other thoughts about why a compass from a designer standpoint.
I think Brandon's absolutely right. I mean, they talk about when you are doing design, there could be, I think they say there's like a number of good lifetimes that you could have based on that. So just, I guess, to reemphasize what Brandon said, is it's not one destination, but a lot of possibilities.
In the beginning, it says we need to know where we are at any given point.
Yeah.
And the only way you can know where you are when you're, again, out in the woods lost, which is a nightmare of mine. But if you know where true north is, which is I think what the compass works with, then you always know where you are relative to that.
Okay, so it gives you a point of reference as well as a possibility out of those terrible woods that Dawn will probably have nightmares about tonight. Starting creation by now, she's probably thinking, I'm going to need therapy before this class is over. So, but yes, you're right from that standpoint.
Also with the compass, if you plan on going towards north and something happens in front of you, with a compass, you can turn around and find a different way. And that can happen in our own lives. You might think you want to go in one direction, but that might not work out. So then you find that another way,
Okay.
the opposite direction. Just go.
And still, so there may be more than one way to get to where you want to go, but you may end up going several different ways to get there before it's all said and done. Yeah. I really want you to hear, for me, this is one of those kind of key moments in my brain that keeps both my appreciation of entrepreneurship thinking and design thinking in conversation with each other, because there are moments where, well, the map just isn't going to work, but maybe a compass will be enough to get you moving forward from that standpoint. And since I am terrible at reading maps, and if my wife, I don't know if my wife can hear me right now, but since I am terrible at reading maps and there is no Google Earth that could get me out of trouble, at least the compass can at least tell me when I'm lost, not necessarily tell me when I'm found, but at least remind me when I am lost from that standpoint. In a way, up till now in the book, be it the work, play, love, health dashboard, the life view, the work view, the good time journal, which is what came up this week. In some ways, you're really just building a compass. You're not building a map yet. So the same way in entrepreneurship, up until this week, we have built at least one concept. We now have started a conceptual map. I really want to say that at this point, so far, we've really been working on a compass when it comes to design thinking. And I hope that metaphor makes sense to you. Even the mind mapping exercise, though that begins to bridge somewhere else, that AEIOU framework, but even thinking about your own life, you're really just assembling components to the compass so that as you move forward, at least through the life view and the work view particularly, but also through the work, play, love, and health dashboard, you have a kind of sense of where you are and what the compass is going to look like that's going to guide you moving forward. Does that make sense to everyone? So we're there. Really, another way to think of it, if you, depending on how much you did, and again, I'm not having you turn stuff into me week by week, and we'll probably start talking more about design thinking tonight, but you really will have enough data out of the book after tonight that you can start even talking about that as your major project next week. One of the ways to think about the general assignments to date is just how much empathy for your life do you need, is one way to say that. I mean, it's really, design thinking really is a version of mindfulness, just being aware of who you are, where you are, if you do those exercises. But it is mindfulness with direction, with a kind of direction for action. And that will come up next week with the Odyssey planning. So there is a reason why you're doing these kind of introspective exercises up to this point in the book. Has anyone tried several of those or a couple of those at this point? Things that stood out to you in doing those? I don't want to put people on the spot, but anything, just comments about that part of the book? Holly?
When it came to the dashboard, I was actually surprised at some of my things that I expected to be a certain way. But when I sat down and actually thought about it and kind of talked through it in my brain, realized that maybe it was more full than I thought, or, you know, like that. I was just, it was a good thing for me to do. And as for the journal, I haven't started it yet, but I'll be starting that tomorrow.
That's fine. And I saw that in your post. So I want you to know, I didn't, the book has exercises that hopefully as you think, and particularly if you're going to shift away from the venture into this, they become really, really important from that standpoint. Now, there will be an exercise for everybody down the road, which is more the next component, which is the Odyssey plan that everybody will at least be submitting a version of from that standpoint. Okay. Really, till we get to the Odyssey plan, just some ideas, just general comments, and in some sense, trying to build from the beginning of the class when we looked at the design thinking inside venture planning, wanted to kind of show some of the principles tonight in a way that can be helpful both for your Odyssey planning coming up later, but also with your venture. So stay with me. We're going to do some exercises this evening. This idea of the A, E, I, O, and U, that you just basically walk through they're doing it with your own life in mind, but thinking about the activities that are important, the environments that influence, the quality of the interactions that you have with others, the objects that are important in your life, and even those who are the very people that would engage your life. And that's kind of where the design thinkers use this language. That language is also important in some ways of thinking about your venture. So Melly, I'm going to pick on you for just a second, but not for long. People are going into a new educational strategy at ENC, for instance. So what are the important activities? What are the environments that are a part of that? What kinds of interactions, particularly not only in their own educational channel, but also with the broader university and the educational components? What are things, objects that intersect that are a part of moving into this? And obviously one of the ways to use that one is to even think about the things that would be needed as a part of an educational program with a focus on any of the healthcare fields. And what is needed right alongside the classroom experience, but the labs and the kinds of things that go with that, as well as then who the users are, and particularly even how this might make a difference. And once this curriculum is designed, becomes the kind of ways in which the AEIO and U work. In this class, in the book, it's really to expand the understanding of contexts that shape our lives. How many of you have done mind mapping before in some form or fashion? Rachel, anybody else? Okay, Delmy? Dawn? Okay. It's just a brainstorming idea. And I didn't, you will see this on the next slide. There are mind mapping software programs out there. We used to have an associate dean at the seminary. I think his whole brain was nothing but a mind map. And he used that software for everything. When I do mind mapping, I tend to use Post-it notes. And you just put ideas there and you slap them up on a board. And then that gives you the permission to move things around. And what you're really looking for are connections between disparate ideas and the intersections among those. That's how a mind map really works. And so when we used to do this as a face-to-face environment, we used to literally do mind mapping in the classroom as an exercise, but I'm going to pass that one and talk about a couple of other ones instead for tonight. A reminder, this is a little bit of a reminder, but I think it's really important as we move forward. And in some ways, what designers are always reminding us about is, are we wrestling with, if we move from that defining stage that we talked about last week into the ideation, the creativity stage, if you will, in design thinking, is that the better we define what we're trying to accomplish, the better our ideation is going to be. And designers do not want to get hung up in anchor problems. They hate those kinds of problems that at one level are just gravity inducing problems that you just feel like you're anchored and you can't move. If you feel stuck, then that is probably, as they said in the video, that is probably a gravity problem. You need to acknowledge it and move on. Don't get hung up in that one piece. But what designers really want, the phrase they use is they're always looking for a wicked problem. And that is really at the heart of design thinking. They want a problem that is really hard to fully define. So part of the design process is even exploring the nature of the fullness of the problem. And it definitely is a solution that's not known. So, this is really tough in the church. I'm just going to name it again. I think I mentioned this last week. Leaders in the church always feel this need to sort of leave the posture that they know, at least they have a reasonably good idea how to solve something up front. I don't know, maybe it's something about divine revelation and it just inhabits all of us. So we think that we're supposed to have an answer at least, or the better line is, God has the answer. We're going to find out what that is, right? That's a lot better than just saying, I don't know, but let's work on it. But that actually is what design thinkers do. They just go, this looks like a pretty good idea, but we don't know. So let's work on it and let's see whether it's the best idea. And that is how you work on a wicked problem. Some of those will probably show up in your venture. You'll get to a point, because most of us aren't experts in entrepreneurship. And so at times we're just going to get to a point and we might say, I don't know what I need to work on that for the next week. I need to figure out how to respond to that, as opposed to being completely locked down. Am I making sense tonight at 8 o'clock, my time at least? For those of you on the East Coast, that's 9, probably feeling like midnight about now. Okay. So we're going to talk about 2 ways of thinking about using design thinking, ideation, through what's called divergent thinking. This week we'll talk about divergent. Next week we'll talk about convergent thinking, and definitely how we might use this in our own ventures. So I'm going to suggest a couple of things. I'm going to put you back in groups. I sent you the PDF. You should have access to that right on Moodle. It should have arrived in your email inbox, so that you will have this to grab and look at on the side when it's all said and done. But let me walk us through those. There are 2 ideate strategies that I really like. The first one's called the 5 whys. The second one's called how might we. So these are strategies that you'll get in a lot of designer toolkits. One place I got them was actually right from Stanford. They have a lot of free resources, and they called it a mixtape. May tell you how old that sucker is at this point. I don't know anybody talks about mixtapes anymore, but it was a kind of novel way of talking about different skill sets. And we'll start with the 5 whys. And one way to think about this is, how many of you have ever been around, well, probably a preschooler or maybe a toddler who was just locked into that one word, why? Okay. I see those hands. I mean, it's that phrase that drives us absolutely insane, right? But there is a method behind that. So stay with me. What I want you to do when you get back in your small groups, you can pick some component of what you've been working on. It could be your elevator speech. It could be an obstacle. In other words, a potential competitor. It could be even the overall purpose of what you're trying to work on. You can go back and look over the value proposition statement, for instance. And then if you're still wrestling with it, do this, and your team has permission to do this. Offer an explanation for the value that your venture offers, and then just have somebody ask you why. And answer, and somebody ask you why. And answer, and you go through this why question 5 times. Okay? So you're just constantly re-answering your answer, but all you're doing is exploring deeper the why behind the answer that you gave. Does that make sense? You only have to go 5. If you can get 3, you might be doing good. If you get to 5 and you suddenly want to find somebody and hunt them down, then maybe 3 is good enough from that standpoint. But it's one reason to do this is every why does imply a course of action. And it's just a way of sort of doing the brainstorming, if you will, by looking at sort of engaging whatever's crucial that you're struggling with and trying to get at the underneathness of it just by asking why 5 times. Does that make sense? Okay, any concerns? And it'll take a couple of volunteers, but it's a good way of kind of engaging. And, a lot of times what happens is a couple of them you're not that energized by, but look for, as you hear them, look for the ways in which constituents or partners expend energy in answering them. And later you'll come back to those 5 whys and say, well, which one of these is the most important? Which one would you prioritize? Or does one of the whys really raise new questions or new problems you have to solve? Those are the 5 whys are really just to get ideas out there that you're brainstorming so that you can then evaluate all 5 of those whys, if you will, over time. Does that make sense? Right, energy's starting to drop, so hang with me. I've got one more example. So the 5 whys is one version. The other one I like is really the how might we. How might we is also a set of questions that I really think is at the very core of innovation in design thinking. In a way, the concept, I've said this before, is that design thinking does not want to get lost in the shoulds and oughts. It's always wanting to seek the how might we in the midst of whatever context. And so might as well learn it as an exercise at this point. In a way, there's seeds of ideation, is one way we're going to use it tonight, that fall out of your perspective of the venture or how your life might work. I would say stay with your venture, stay with your value proposition, just that center box, if nothing else. But it creates a seed, it can create a seed that's broad enough to invite a number of solutions inside of it. So let me explain a little bit more. A lot of times then, if you're whatever you're wrestling with, you basically say, how might we explore the exact opposite of the struggle that we're having right now? Or if you have a value proposition, how might we question an assumption underneath that value proposition? Or can we create an analogy from need to the context? So looking at it from the end user standpoint, how might they actually talk about your value proposition instead of how you talk about it? Or what if we change the status quo of the whole relationship? How might we then literally engage that? Okay. Now, does that sound extremely abstract at this point? And you're going, oh, help me, Jesus. All right. Illustration. This is my last major slide. So we tried this, I won't say how far back, but in the class, and this was a student. And so basically the student was coming up with a vision of providing a service that could engage churches and that really would engage churches to benefit their local community. So she envisioned this in some ways being a resource, a service to churches. And the idea was to start a career advisory service that provides resources to high schoolers and adults on topics like the skill gap in your area, coordinating tutoring with local congregations, financial planning, volunteering opportunities to grow skill sets, resume build, resume consultation, skill building. And so she really was seeing her creating basically what she called the Career Possible service that she would partner with churches and then provide a service to those churches to work with, particularly with young people, as they were beginning to consider a new career. Does that make sense? Everybody with me so far? And her statement was, Career Possible provides crowdsourced perspectives on career pathways coupled with personalized connections to local resources, scholarships, courses, and support. Career Possible coaches bring years of recruiting and talent development background to honest discussions about skill set alignment, resume and interview readiness, and potential next steps, with a desire to see each individual realize their own potential in a network of local resources aligned to this vision. Career Possible offers insights, advice, and opportunities to expand the possibilities of what the future can hold. And she was already building sort of her plan out of there. Her struggle, the student struggle, was for an organization to provide these services. Did that mean they had to provide all the content? And was that going to be a gravity problem for them? In other words, if Career Possible as a service to churches working with young people to help them find their career path, were they going to have to provide all of these kinds of resources, handouts on scholarships, different kinds of courses, and create the curriculum to help young people figure out what their potential vocational call was going to be? Was the whole thing going to basically collapse in on itself just in trying to create tons of resources? Everybody with me up to this point? So we played the how might we? And we basically said, so what if we explored the opposite? What if we designed the venture where could you design in such a way you don't have to create any content? And is there a way to do this venture in such a way that content creation and providing content was not even what they were going to do? Could there be other things about curating relationships or other things that could be done in its place? Or let's question the assumption, do we even need to provide content or teach how, or do we really need to teach how to find the content? So is it the job of a service to actually create all these vocational strategies and tests and measurements, or is it really the responsibility of the service just in some ways to teach students, young people, how to go find those things? And we don't even have to provide anything. We just provide the skill set so they could go and figure out how to create those things and locate what they needed. To create an analogy from need to context, we just asked this question. You know, the career content, Career Possible was going to create all these things to prepare young people so that they would be ready to move into the career of their choice. But the question was, how do we know that? I mean, is that what employers are telling us that young people need? And what if we went to them and said, we'll actually serve as a service, but a broker based on the way you see needing people enter into your particular profession or field, and let you, instead of us designing stuff, envisioning what it might be, let you tell us what we need to be telling people from that standpoint. And the last one, it's changing the status quo. It was just really basically to say, what if the responsibility for resource development lies with churches and not the service? So what if Career Possible wasn't creating a whole lot of things, but actually working with the church that took vocation as something that is crucial for young people coming through their church, and they were going to be coaches to that church so the church could develop those resources and even replicate all the other things above it so that the church would be empowered to do part of its own ministry of working with young people to help them find their vocational calling in life. Does that make sense? Now, we didn't know that up front. Those came up just by asking these kinds of foreground, background questions. So again, if you're stuck at some point in your venture, maybe something is really bugging you tonight, could you basically say, how might we do this if we don't have to do certain components of the venture? Or, if we start with the actual needs of the end user from that standpoint? Or is there an assumption that we just are stuck on that we can let go of, we can release? It's a gravity problem, let it go. Or, is there even the possibility of changing the status quo to our venture? Does that make sense? All right. This is how, at times, design thinking, as I said earlier, begins to weave its way into venture planning by just asking the right kinds of questions to really open up our ideation. I'm just thinking big on what our venture is trying to accomplish. So I'm going to break you into groups. It's 8:15. I'm going to give you 30 minutes. I'm going to encourage each group to either choose the 5 whys or how might we. So you get to pick that. You can pick what you have in your venture plan. You should have at least enough, nothing else, from the pitch and the ideate component. For some of you, it's right there in your business concept map that you could say, can we try this through the 5 whys, or can we try this through the how might we, and see if it helps me get a bigger picture of what I want to try to accomplish. Okay? All right. Back to your rooms. You've got the PDF. Hopefully everybody's found that. And then we'll be back here at 8:45 just for a quick debrief and then head out.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm really not happy with my venture. And I keep going back to changing it. Is it very late to do that?
Not too late. I mean, this is, so it might mean some work, so hear that, but it's not too late. I mean,
Well,
tonight, maybe tonight might be, how might we do something different? And
Well,
and-
the reason why is this is just I don't even know how to explain it. It's not really a venture. It's something I've already done. And I don't see it getting bigger at all because I don't have the desire to do it. But let me just tell you what I'm thinking. A few months ago, we started talking about starting an after program school at our church. And a lot of these things that come up are more, I can say more things about it than what I would about officiating a wedding. Does that make sense?
that's fine. So yes, you can.
But I will have to go back to.
Well, you at least have to work, I mean, conceptually work through those big ideas up front, but you're not so far down that, for instance, all the things out of the ideate would probably not take long to replicate now that you've done them once. It's
Mhm.
really more, how do you get to the business concept map so that you have the value proposition that's there, and in some ways, ideate moves right into that so that you can then consider all those other components. Okay.
I'm gonna think a little bit about this tonight, and maybe tomorrow I'll change it. If not, I'll just stick with what I'm doing. But
Okay,
I wanted to hear your voice to.
Yeah, but yes, you have permission to change, just so you know that. Yeah, so
Okay.
that's, and it's not too late. I mean, Kaufman's really designed to be something you could iterate. It'll probably take a little bit of work, but if it's something that better now than 3 more weeks from now, and then feel like
Right.
that's really an important component. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Go join your group. Any other questions? Any other concerns? Yeah, Melody? Or is that no, that's my hand, not yours. I'm sorry. Anyone? Anybody ready to go home? Well, that's a good thing. So, because I am home. I'm ready to go home as well. So, keep working. That's the only way to say it. Keep reading. Next week is just 2 more chapters in design thinking. We're moving into another component. A reminder, and a couple of you have already posted, there is a kind of summary reflection on the whole position experience that's built into Moodle. Just asking sort of what's your take coming out of the Moodle perspective. So if you'll log that, I would appreciate it. And it's 8:48, and I will send you home. Okay. And if you have any concerns, blessings. We'll see you guys next week. All right. All right. Take care.